4 things that were absolutely really good. And we had to narrow that down to 1. And we chose VMDO Architects. They're an architectural firm here locally in Charlottesville. They specialize in K-12 education. And so I think we made a really good decision. We've started the master plan. Once we got it going, we got it officially started in April, which I guess we're still in April, but it was early April. This will be going through the end of the calendar year. And we are planning to give a lot of stakeholders a lot of opportunities to weigh in. We want to get as many people to give us feedback as possible. Students, parents, staff, teachers, community members, anyone at all is welcome to participate as we work through this. Our goals and objectives for this master plan, I'm going to clarify one thing. This is a facilities master plan. So this really doesn't focus on curriculum or programming or, course offerings or those types of things. We are looking at just the facilities themselves, how they will handle growth, how they will handle our current enrollment and our future enrollment. The study will also look at, where our growth patterns are and whether it may be recommended that we redistrict at some point in the future, or perhaps build onto a school that's possible for, perhaps build a new school. These are all things that are on the table that we are waiting for the recommendations on. So that's one big thing we're trying to deal with is growth enrollment. We also are looking at equity and in specific facility equity. Our facilities are of different ages. They have different types of systems. They've, got different types of water supplies and all that. Because of that, they are not all equal in the infrastructure that they have. And so one part of this, and VMDO will get to that later, is about just assessing the buildings as they are, because we want to make sure that we're not looking 20 years down the road. We want to make sure that students currently and soon are playing on an equal playing field when it comes to their facilities and the amenities that their facilities offer. We know that each school and each community has specific needs. Some, walk to school more than others do. We're going to take into account all of those different types of things: traffic, parking, flow, busing, all the things that we look at. We're also, as we look at busing, we're talking about environmental sustainability. Right now, we're looking at electric buses and how we move those among the county. As we move forward, we're going to be looking at green options to just, try to reduce our carbon footprint, go to a net zero, sustainable practices, sustainable buildings. And the last thing is we want to build and add on to and provide facilities that support both our current and our future educational programming. So, we've done a good job of that in some of the additions and renovations we've made, but it's really hard to keep up with technology and growth. And so part of the study will try to look at how that all interplays with each other and what the cutting edge trends are. What is the school of the future for Albemarle County? All recommendations will be consistent with our vision, mission, values, and goals of the Albemarle County Public Schools Strategic Plan. And so that is driving everything that we have done so far and everything that we will continue to do as we move forward. And with that, I would like to introduce our team from VMDO Architects. We are working with Ben Thompson, who will be our primary presenter this evening. He is working also with Nathan Fitzsimmons and Rob Winstead, who is Nathan is the technology guru and Rob is the educational specialist. Ben is the lead architect on the job. They will have a guest speaker that they will introduce that I'm very excited about and present a program that I think is going to be very interactive and give you lots of opportunities to weigh in. So with that, I will turn this over to Ben.
All right, great. Thank you, Lisa. Can everybody hear me? Who's on tonight? Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, as Lisa said, I'm Ben Thompson with VMDO, joined by my colleagues Rob Winstead and Nathan Fitzsimmons. And in case you don't know, about VMDO. VMDO is a local architecture firm here in Charlottesville with the focus on education and community. And we've worked on almost all of the schools in ACPS. We have kids who have gone to or are going to some of these schools. And so we're really excited to be working on this important master plan study to envision the future of ACPS middle schools together with you. So you'll see on your screen, this is a 9-month process. And as Lisa said, it will include a robust assessment of the sites and buildings, looking at the condition, the capacity, educational adequacy of each of the buildings and the sites. We'll work to be identifying the deficiencies in comparison to one another and to an ideal ACPS middle school. We'll have a portion or a phase of this work that which we think will be one of the most telling and exciting portions of this study to explore multiple options for each site and prepare cost models that we can evaluate together and with stakeholders to look at alternative futures for what these schools could be. And then there'll be a portion of the study that will look to select one preferred option for each site and then prioritize those options within the framework of CIP phasing that will look at updated costs that includes inflation and help to prioritize those projects for CIP planning and funding. Those are the goals of the study. And then towards the end of the study, we'll be developing a master plan report, presenting to the school board and to the long range planning committee, all of the findings from what we've been doing over the last 9 months. So a little bit about the key roles. On the screen, you'll see that we have 3 major groups that will be carrying through the study. The steering committee consists of ACPS leadership, and they'll be the group that's making the big decisions about direction. Again, as Lisa said, aligning with the overall ACPS mission, vision, and goals. We have a stakeholder group, which includes the community, our first stakeholder and community.
Tenemos un grupo de personas interesadas
On board for that, casting a little wider net. And we really want these public meetings to be well attended so we can hear from you what are all of the important critical success factors for designing middle schools in the 21st century. And then we're also
en el siglo XXI. También vamos a colaborar con las
personnel to get more in-depth discussions about each school. And here's just a quick look at the schedule that aligns those key steering committee meetings over the next 9 months, and then opportunities for the larger community to weigh
oportunidades para la comunidad.
Today's info session, and then we're looking towards the end of the study to present the findings of the full master plan in a live gallery walk that will lay out the whole master plan and allow folks to walk around and comment. All right, so for everyone on the screen, for those of us who were just joining us or weren't able to see the QR code at the beginning of this presentation, if you'll go to the link below, scan the QR code, we have an opening poll. I would ask folks to answer this question: to meet the needs of students, educators, and the community, a middle school facility in Albemarle County must have. What's an absolute must-have for a middle school in Albemarle County? So we can share these results. We're going to be polling throughout the course of tonight's presentation.
Vamos a usar encuestas durante la presentación de esta noche para que todos puedan ver los resultados.
And then we'll have a way to collect all this information and use it moving forward to help drive what are the important values that we need to be thinking about as we develop options for each site. All right, seeing some good responses. Technology, flexible spaces, and you guys are good. I think you're going to find elements of these in the presentation tonight as we look at the future of 21st century learning and environments that support middle school students today. Opportunities for outdoor learning. And opportunities for expansion and growth. These are great. Thank you. And we'll keep this poll open for the next little bit as we move on. I think we need to be cognizant of our time together. And I would like to now introduce, if we can, Nancy Deutsch, who some of you may know. She's worked with schools and communities here in Charlottesville and Albemarle County and has been doing that for quite some time. Nancy is the Associate Dean for Faculty Development at UVA School of Education and Human Development. And she's also the Director of YouthNext, which some of you may be familiar with. Nancy's research focuses on adolescent development. So we thought it would be a really great opportunity to have Nancy come and speak with us tonight to sort of set the tone for the user group that we're really talking about here, middle school students. And so you may also have worked with Nancy. She focuses a lot on after-school programs and relationships with students and adults, particularly in the realm of supporting youth, and especially those who are at risk due to economic or socio-cultural factors. So Nancy is here to talk a little bit more about the adolescent learner, particularly middle school kids. And so it's great to have you, Nancy, joining us tonight. Can't hear you. Oh, can't share the screen. How about that? Can you unmute, Nancy? Okay.
Okay,
better?
thank you.
Okay, there you
Yep,
go.
now I can unmute. Great. Thanks so much, Ben. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you all tonight. As Ben said, I really focus on adolescent development, and at the core of my work is really thinking about how we use the science of adolescence, so really what we know about adolescent development, to help inform all of the settings that serve people. So that's really why I'm here. So I'm going to try to convince you first that it's really important that we invest in middle schools. Many of you probably don't need convincing, but in case you do, I'm going to make the case for it and then talk a little bit about what that would look like. So what you see in front of you is actually a picture that my daughter drew when she was about 8. And I like to start with this when I'm talking about middle school and why it's so important, because this was an 8-year-old's view of middle school. She was writing a graphic novel. This is the picture of a girl's first day of middle school. And you could see that it's the girl with the pinkish pants, with the wide eyes.
Y es la chica con el pantalón rosado. Hay dos niños besándose allá atrás.
And when I asked her, wait, this is what you think middle school is?
Cuando yo le pregunté,
This is what middle school is. And she just looked at me. She's like, Mom, I read books and watch movies and TV. I know that this is what middle school is. And so I think it's really important to remember that this is the story that kids are getting about middle school, that when we don't invest in middle school and when what they're seeing are these negative stories, right? That is what they're expecting. And as we all know in education, people live up and down to expectations. So until we as adults change the way that we talk about middle school and we really start investing in it as a place that is worth investing in, then this is going to continue to be the way young people think about it. And the other reason it's so important, we can go to the next slide, is that there's been a lot of focus, and rightfully so, on early childhood education. But what we also know is that when we only intervene in early childhood, outcomes down the road are not as good. So you really need to support students throughout their development, so that we really need to focus not just on the early childhood or the early elementary grades, but also into and through middle school and high school. And in fact, these young adolescent years of middle school are really, really important years, and they provide a great opportunity for investment. So we can go to the next slide. So adolescence really encompasses a number of different ages. And so it tends to be thought about as the onset of puberty, all the way through the mid-20s at this point in young adulthood. But what we're talking about with middle school is really early adolescence. So it's about the onset of puberty around age 10 to about 12. And so some middle schools also lean a bit into middle adolescence, which is around ages 13 to 15. But when we think about middle schools, it really is this period of early adolescence, which is a time of really tremendous change. Adolescents' bodies are changing, their brains are changing, their social lives are changing. And if you think about that, you think about what that's like, right? You're waking up every day, your body is changing. Your body looks different, than it did a few weeks ago or a few months ago. Your peer groups are changing, your social lives are changing. But so the more that we can create stability and consistent support in their environments, the better position youth are to adapt positively to the change that they're experiencing and to capitalize on the opportunities that these changes bring with them. So what do those changes look like? So the adolescent brain, the young adolescent brain, is experiencing a great period of what's called plasticity, right? So this is the period where there are the most number of changes in the brain, second only to early childhood. The young adolescent brain is also very, very sensitive to the environment and to environmental cues, especially around social rewards and risks, around peers, and around stress, right? So that means that their brains are particularly focused on their friends, which we think about a lot, we know that. They are more apt to take risks and to seek out social rewards, and they're more likely to experience stress at a higher rate. But all of that also means they're more responsive to supports in the environment too, which is great news for people who work with young people, right? Because they're actually just as likely to be able to take in the supportive parts of an environment. They're also experiencing tremendous growth in cognitive skills. So reasoning, problem solving, future thinking, planning, those are all things that they are getting better at, that they're growing at, and that they want to practice in their school spaces. And that needs support and scaffolding from the adults around them. So the adolescent brain, if you go to the next one, is certain parts of it are changing. There's sometimes a mismatch between the parts that are changing at different rates. However, I really want to urge you to think about this not as the young adolescent brain as being underdeveloped, but as being uniquely fit to meet the needs of this stage of life. So the changes that are happening in the brain and the way in which the different actually allows young people to explore new environments, to build new relationships with the world and people around them. And that, I often tell people, if adolescents were not more open to risk, if they weren't more open to social reward from peers, your young people would never leave home, right? Like, think about the things that this age, adolescents, that they're preparing to go out in the world and do. Their brain is actually preparing them for that. And as I mentioned, that also does lead to heightened sensitivity to rewards, to willingness to take risks, and to awareness of social status. But those are things that can really be taken advantage of for positive in school settings. So when we sort of structure middle school settings to allow young people to take safe risks, right? To seek out novelty in safe ways, to seek out social reward in ways that support their learning and development. All of those are things that can be done safely within the school. So again, there are these asynchronous development in fundamental areas of the brain throughout adolescence. So they can be more impulsive, particularly in response to positive incentive. But if properly monitored and cushioned by parents in the community, adolescents can learn from missteps and take advantage of what can be viewed as these developmental opportunities. And in fact, if we go to the next slide, we know that investments in programs and interventions that capitalize on brain plasticity during adolescence can really promote beneficial changes. So what this slide is basically showing you is that this adolescent period, while there can be these negative environmental stressors and influences, because adolescents are also more responsive to positive influences in the environment, they are more responsive to these programs and interventions that can set them on a strong trajectory and can buffer negative impacts of the environment. So adolescence really provides an opportunity for healing and repair, leaving young people better equipped to handle future adversities. So this is really a great time for redirection, recovery, and resilience. So what are the key developmental needs of adolescents that we really need to think about as we are designing middle schools for young people? Sense of belonging and purpose. Young people at this age are looking to belong, they're looking for groups, and they are looking for meaning. They want to know who they fit in, how they fit in the world, what's their sense of purpose. They're seeking their identity, positive identity, a lot of exploration of who they are in the world. They're looking for opportunities for agency and leadership. They need positive social interactions and relationships with both peers and adults. We often, particularly as parents, think about early adolescence as a time when young people are starting to maybe turn away from families a bit more and looking to peer groups. But in fact, relationships with both peers and supportive adults, including adults in schools, are really important. Goal setting, confidence, and achievement are really important needs. They need to feel a sense of confidence. They need to have opportunities to set goals and to experience achievement of those goals. They need to have opportunities for flexible problem solving. They need to have opportunities for exploration and novelty. They're very open to exploring and novelty. So having school environments where they can both experience stability in relationships, but also novelty and opportunities to explore. Opportunities for autonomy and self-direction and physical activity. Physical activity is incredibly important during middle school. And so having space to move around is very, very important. So you can see on this slide, this is sort of some of the ways that these come out, thinking about having safe and satisfying ways to explore the world, being given opportunities for real world scenarios where they can try things out, avenues to develop a sense of meaning, warmth and supporting relationships, experiences that help define their values and goals, and positive ways to earn respect and social status. So the Association for Middle Level Education has put together a list of what they say successful schools for young adolescents should include. And so we can go to the next slide. And they note that successful schools for young adolescents, what we would say middle schools, should be responsive, challenging, empowering, equitable, and engaging. I don't think any of us would disagree with that, but I think you can also see when we think about what the specific developmental needs are, why these particular things are important. So what might this look like for middle school spaces as you think about what your current spaces do and what you might dream, what the ideal space for the Albemarle County middle schools that you envision of the future could be, right? You want a message that students are valued, affirm diverse ways of being and knowing, provide opportunities for physical movement. That I think is often challenging when we get to middle school. We tend to have less recess time, right, than elementary school, but it's still really important. Finding ways to promote social interaction and collaboration, both formally and informally. So thinking about ways that you can build both learning spaces and socializing spaces that allow for interaction and collaboration. Building spaces that allow for student-centered and self-directed learning, including flexible spaces, encouraging exploration and self-expression within the spaces. Also having spaces that allow for focus and reflection. So yes, you want spaces that allow for social interaction. You also want spaces where kids can reflect and focus. Integrating technology, I saw that came up a lot in your desires, and that's definitely really important. And thinking about engaging the multiple senses. We don't always think about that, but really having the sort of the whole young person. Those are different ways also of exploration and novelty seeking that can kind of engage their whole brain. So those are some of the things that middle school spaces can do to sort of align themselves with these needs of young adolescents. And I believe there are now, 2 questions for you that we'd like you to do with the group poll. So the first is in 1 or 2 words. What do you think is the greatest challenge facing ACPS middle school students today? And the second is in 1 or 2 words. What do you think is the greatest opportunity facing ACPS middle students today? I will now, I think, am I turning it back over to you, Ben?
Yes, thank you, Nancy. That's wonderful. It looks like in our poll that these questions are separated. So the first one will be, what do you think is the greatest challenge facing ACPS middle schools? And so if you could spend a moment answering that question, and we can see how that's being populated on the screen. And the way this works is that if a word is repeated, it'll get bigger on the screen. So you're welcome to repeat words that you already see are up there if you find one to be important to you. And this is a way to just aggregate from the group what the group thinks are the most challenging things facing ACPS, specifically ACPS middle school students today, after hearing what Nancy has presented to us. We'll just take a few minutes to do that. And be thinking about your 1 word for the next question, right? In 1 or 2 words, what do you think is the greatest opportunity facing ACPS middle school students today? That'll come up soon when we switch to the next question. Social media, front and center. These are good. Okay. If everyone has had a chance to respond, we can switch to the next question. So what do you think is the greatest opportunity facing ACPS middle school students today? A lot of folks recognizing that technology is a really important factor in this generation's time and growth. It can be really impactful at this age. It could also be a challenge. So I'm seeing that come up a lot as a refrain so far in our responses. Okay, this is great. We're going to leave this poll up as we move on to the next section. So you can continue to edit as you see fit. And we'll move on. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about design for the adolescent learner. You've heard Nancy talk about the wants and needs of adolescents. So asking an important question, or lots of important questions that are thought-provoking, and how can we break the perception that middle school kids are a problem? If that question alone can be challenged, that's some middle school students are sometimes seen as the forgotten middle. That time between the heartwarming elementary school time and the time of academic press at the high school level. And so we have this great opportunity to meet middle schoolers at a time when they're experiencing the second greatest, oh, sorry. Am I still on? Need to share. Nathan's telling me I need to share my screen. There we go. We have this great opportunity to meet middle schoolers at a time when they're experiencing the second greatest spike in brain development since infancy. And it only lasts a few years between ages 11 and 14. And so as Nancy shared a few of these, there's a lot of criteria for middle school kids who are searching for their identity. They're building and understanding how they fit into different social networks, seeking a number of future interests and career paths. And so how can design, particularly the design of middle schools, meet the wants and needs of the adolescent learner? And so we know that middle school kids are both seeking connections with one another, but also wanting to stay, within the close gaze of their supervisors. So providing the see and be seen spaces for social interaction at a variety of different scales and proximities and visibility to administrative and teaching support spaces are great to provide for middle school kids. They love these kinds of spaces being on the kind of the fringe edge, not quite in the middle, for social collaboration. Sort of rethinking the traditional model of the four-walled classroom and science rooms, and considering alternatives like learning studios and suites that allow for a greater level of collaboration and exploration. Providing spaces for large, small, and individual group learning that are flexible and adaptable, using flexible furniture and technology to support student voice and choice, and putting learning on display and allowing for self-directed exploration of future career pathways. So different STEM and tech spaces, opportunities to explore nature inside and outside the building. And we know that student health directly impacts cognitive function and mental well-being, which in turn has a direct correlation to long-term performance and better test scores. And so we always start these conversations with the disclaimer that we're not educators, let alone brain scientists. And we recognize that there are many different factors that shape the learning experience. The environment is only one of those. The 9 Foundations of a Healthy Building, published by Harvard School of Public Health, identifies major criteria for a healthy building. And I'm going to walk through some of these to share some best practices for middle schools and maybe pair them with some images of some of the existing schools, middle schools at ACPS. So daylight and views. Some, not all of your classrooms are getting natural light. Others are kind of on a north-south orientation, and they're receiving some unwanted east-west sun. So orientation really matters for daylight. You want to maximize or optimize orientation for your classroom buildings. Most of your classrooms do have sunshade for occupant control. But the best practices are to include daylighting, of course, in all of the teaching spaces, give occupants the ability to control both what's happening on the perimeter of the room and also within the room with electric lighting to customize the learning environment. Mechanical units in classrooms can be really noisy, so acoustics matter. The best practice is to design efficient HVAC systems, provide acoustic separations and zoning between important spaces that need to be acoustically isolated, and then use sound absorptive materials to better improve acoustics in those spaces. Indoor air quality is, of course, very important, especially following the pandemic. As we've learned, the best practice is to use dedicated outside air systems that provide better circulation of air within each space, and provide operable windows where we can in each classroom. So design the systems that allow for that user operability, giving occupants the ability to bring in fresh air when they need, and to not have to use the mechanical systems. We know that balanced nutrition directly affects student health and the ability to focus. So providing open kitchens and healthy food education opportunities, using the site for growing food and hands-on learning, and also incorporating signage to teach about food education and diet. As Nancy mentioned, physical activity, promoting physical well-being, giving students ample spaces for movement and physical activity, outdoor learning spaces, fitness spaces with good visibility to them, so people know how to get there, and flexible furniture that encourages movement and activity. A safe and secure learning environment is also particularly important and on people's minds in this day and age. So ensuring that there is good access, control, and visibility on the site, providing open spaces for community connection and good visibility, both outside and inside the building, to allow for passive supervision of public spaces and active supervision. And then designing for inclusion. Inclusive design ensures that places and experiences are all open to all people, regardless of age, disability, and background. So providing spaces that support children with special needs, for instance, students and middle school students who need particular resources that their homes maybe can't provide, and recognizing the diversity of students and staff, administrators, and the community, and providing a place of safety and identity for everyone are really important. So I'll stop right there. That was a lot of information, perhaps a big wash of information that would like everyone a chance to absorb. And so we'll do another poll. If you're just joining us, if you scan the QR code at the bottom right, you can join this poll. Those of you who have already scanned the QR code should be in already, and the questions will change to allow you to access them. So what are the most important criteria for middle school sites and grounds in the 21st century? And this is a type of poll that allows you to rank your most important to least important. When you select the answer, it jumps to the top as your first selection. You're also allowed to select the one that you've just selected, and it will drop it back down into the main list, so you can organize your most to least important criteria for middle school environments. And these are things like safety and security, community access amenities, outdoor spaces, growth and capacity, and then sustainability and natural resources. All of these, of course, are important, and there are a lot of ways that the design of middle schools and the things that we incorporate into the designs can support these, but there may be some weight given to one or the other to prioritize values for a middle school. So safety and security being at the top of that list for this particular group. Okay, the next question for this poll: what are the most important criteria for middle school buildings? The last question asked important criteria for sites. What are the most important criteria for school buildings in the 21st century? And you can rank those from most to least. And those again include criteria like safety and security, community access, a welcoming and comfortable and aesthetic environment, a positive culture, sustainability, and then the physical aspects of the school, durability, providing adaptable and flexible spaces. All right. Looks like we've got a fair amount of responses. And again, just like the last poll, we'll leave this question up for others to continue to populate. And we can move on to the next section. Okay, at this point, now that we've had a chance, the design team has had a chance to walk through all of the schools. We've done our first pass at our building assessments, and we'll be writing some draft reports about our findings there. But we wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about each of these schools together in a comparative way. So that one of the most important things of this study is to look comprehensively at all of these schools to understand how certain schools compare or contrast with one another in terms of their deficiencies, in terms of the history of additions and renovations, so that we could start to prioritize specific schools for specific needs. And we'll be looking at a lot of different factors. So this is going to be a lot of information coming to you, but I'm going to try to walk through it pretty quickly. Just will say that this presentation will be made available publicly with links to follow up later and kind of parse through some of this data that we're sharing. And then there'll be opportunities to follow up with questions at future meetings or through survey. So first, these are the schools that are a part of the study, as you know, all 5 of your middle schools. And then it also includes community lab, which houses both middle school and high school. That's your charter school. So for the study, we'll be looking more specifically at the scales of the buildings relative to their sites. This will allow us to gain a better understanding of how they relate to one another and on shared campuses. And so, for instance, Henley and Walton have the same acreage, but Henley has had more additions and shares the campus with Brownsville Elementary School. So those two conditions may reveal that these different sites are going to operate differently, potentially in terms of access, traffic flows, site amenities, and such. Of course, Journey is your largest ACPS-owned site, but it also is a shared campus with Albemarle High School, Ivy Creek, and Greer. So we'll be getting into more detailed information about how these sites operate and identify more constraints on the site that will help us understand where are the developable areas on each site. Of course, Burley is a compact building on a really tight site in downtown Charlottesville. So that's a very different condition, on multiple floors, and a community lab is on your smallest site. So we're going to be measuring, of course, areas for potential growth and expansion. So defining what those areas are that are kind of natural or easier expanded areas for directly adjacent to the building, which you can see there in red, versus areas of other available development that might allow us to say, well, we could build in these areas, but we're going to compromise some things like athletic fields or natural wooded areas, or other critical infrastructure like parking and septic or well fields. So these are diagrams that we'll be using moving forward to compare the sites to one another, but also understand what are the greatest areas of development opportunity on each site. One important metric that we will be tracking throughout the course of this study, when we look at the existing buildings comparatively, is the square foot per pupil, so area per student, which generally we follow a minimum of 150 square feet per pupil. That's Virginia Department of Education guideline. We'd like to be greater than that. 150 is probably your minimum. Okay, so just looking at that number alone can start to give us indications of where certain schools might be nearing overcrowding or have some capacity, even for future enrollment growth. So for instance, anything that's hovering below 50 or right around near 50, like Henley and Journey, suggests that you're nearing overcrowding. Lower square footage in this case, as you can see across the way, doesn't necessarily mean less capacity, right? So if you look at Journey, Walton, and Lakeside, they are all about the same size and overall gross square footage. But based on the enrollments at each school, their square foot per pupil changes quite a bit. So that's how we can look at both size and enrollment that exists today, understand how much space is available per occupant, and start to derive some commonalities, similarities, and differences between each school. Part of our analysis of the existing buildings will also include pairing buildings with similar histories and similar features to understand where they are different or the same. And so for instance, Henley and Journey are built at the same time, 1966, on different sides of Albemarle, and they have the same building plan. Walton was built in 1974, and it used Henley and Journey as a prototype. So very similar building footprints, follow the same plan. And if you look at Henley's enrollment, it's much larger than Journey's, and it's received more additions to accommodate that, right? Walton, on the other hand, hasn't had as many additions, but has a much smaller enrollment and a much higher area per student, which might indicate that future growth is possible at that school. So again, another way to compare and contrast these schools together. Burley is your oldest facility. Lakeside is your newest facility. It's another way to compare and contrast buildings against one another. Community Lab has had some renovations in recent years, but hasn't received any additions. We understand we're pretty close to nearing capacity at Community Lab, which houses both high school and middle school. So this is a quick comparison of educational programs. They're all color-coded based on the particular educational program that each school has. This is another way to look at numbers comparatively. That will help us not only see where certain schools have larger aggregated programs, but help us track relevant data across all schools and show how efficiently each school is utilized. So you kind of look at these percentages. So for instance, Henley has almost double the square footage of academic program at 35% than Journey at 24%. But Henley's enrollment is much larger. So that's an example of a kind of comparison we can use with this kind of data. Burley, for example, has 10% of the arts program, which is greater. Others are lower than that, but that's because it's the only middle school that has a full auditorium, right? And then here are just some quick comparisons, some observations across each of these schools. Again, I won't talk about all of these, but this is intended to read kind of left to right to compare. And again, we've paired Henley, Journey, and Walton together because they're similar footprints. You can find a lot of similarities in them in terms of where the additions have happened. But as you move across the page, Henley is your largest in gross square footage. Again, Walton and Lakeside have similar gross square footage to Journey. And then looking at your largest enrollment at Henley, it's also got the lowest square foot per pupil, but there's a factor to consider with the villas that exist on the site at Henley, and those provide additional square footage that make that square foot per pupil jump up a little bit. But it's good to separate those because we are looking at existing buildings, and it just goes to show in terms of enrollment, Henley is the largest enrollment and it needs those villas to accommodate that square foot per pupil, which also is lower than most of the other schools. So something to consider when you look at wants and needs, even though Henley has gotten the most additions and renovations of all the other schools. That can help us understand also where overcrowding exists and where is there apparent growth in these schools, and we put question marks next to where is apparent growth because there's a lot about how the schools are utilized on a daily basis, what is considered a classroom, and that's an important factor. That's a sort of a more granular approach to this exercise that we'll get into more specifically as we move forward in the study. Each of these schools have their own unique thing about them, right? In terms of what's been added. And then, what are the other kind of unique factors? And those are things that we're going to be parsing out through the course of the study. But of course, Henley received a big fitness room addition in 2015. All the schools have secure vestibules that were added. Henley has internal courtyards and a greenhouse, the only school that has a greenhouse that we were able to observe. And then, of course, Journey has a small internal courtyard. Walton and Journey have received modernizations in their science labs in 2017. And similar comparisons across Burley, Lakeside, and Community Lab. You've got your largest in gross square footage in Burley, but that's again really compact over 4 floors on a really challenging site. So, opportunities to look at that building in terms of efficiencies and how would we expand with growing enrollment at that school, might consider more heavy renovation. Maybe heavy demolition of certain areas of the school to build back more efficiently, or look at other opportunities on the site for additions and renovations. But it's a lot more challenging to consider future expansion of that school. Again, Henley received multiple classrooms and additions and renovations to accommodate the enrollment. No additions, very minimal renovations to Lakeside over the years. It's your newest school. And it's unique in that it was the first kind of new concept for ACPS for middle schools with learning communities. So it's set up very differently with each grade level established in its own separate learning community, which is different than the other schools. And of course, your charter school houses middle school and high school. So we're going to be using input from ACPS schools and the users over at Community Lab to understand better how that school functions on a daily basis, how enrollments happen and evolve, right? It's an enrollment by application for 4 years of a student's life if they wish to go that path. And then what are other opportunities on the site, considering that it's a small site, but there are possible areas of development if you consider the trailers down below the site on the lower end that house the specialty programs. And by our assessment, as we walked through, Community Lab has had the least investment overall of all the schools, so it's something else to consider. So I'm going to stop right there. That's a lot of information. Again, we can come back to these slides later in the Q&A, but want to take this opportunity to now break into some breakout discussions. And so I'm going to ask Daphne to help organize this, or is it Ayana who's going to organize these breakouts?
Yes.
They're set and ready to go. Are you
Okay.
going to do you still want 15 minutes?
Well, so let me ask this, how much time do we have? Are we strict to 15 to 7:30?
We've got about 20
20 minutes?
total,
Okay.
maybe
So,
10.
okay, let's do 10 minutes for breakout groups. And these are the questions we're going to ask in each group. And then the hope is that we can designate someone from each group to be a reporter back to the larger group. And we'll make that a 10-minute exercise as well to finish out our time together.
Hello, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed the presentation so far.
Yes, thank you.
All right, are you all able to unmute yourselves? Okay,
Yep.
great. So we have 3 questions that we need to discuss during the breakout session. First, what questions, comments, or concerns do you have? What opportunities do you see for the future of ACPS middle schools? And what do you hope to see this master plan study address? And if we have someone who would be so gracious to take a few notes for us for the group and report back when we get back in the main room, that would be great. Do you have any volunteers? No volunteers?
I'd be happy to do it, but I don't think it should be me because I'm part of the presentation team. I think the point was they want folks who are attendees, but
Yes, that's correct.
I'll take some notes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll try.
All right, so let's deal with the first question. You have any questions, comments, or concerns? Any questions, comments, concerns?
I can go ahead and answer the first question if that's okay.
Sure.
Uh-oh, is it not coming from me? Oh, okay. Okay, making sure you can hear me. So I just wanted to mention really quickly that I see the opportunity as being one that we could have for high school. So that's like kind of my answer kind of wraps up all into one, that my biggest concern is where the high schools will go, or how things will look for the high schools. And so my hope is that this will be like a starting point for how they'll start working on high school.
Okay. Renice, working on renovating the high schools?
Renovating and or adding. So
Okay.
sort of the same thing. We're at Lakeside, so we're not seeing as much overcrowding, but I heard that when he gets to Albemarle High School, we will start to see that. And the fact that I'm hearing that other middle schools are already being overcrowded is a little concerning,
Okay,
as a lot of those will funnel in.
okay. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. Any other feedback around questions or concerns?
Well, I guess I had a question. They were talking about how this whole process, this making a plan process is going to take 9 months. And I guess the thing is implementation of whatever comes out of this. I'm imagining that's years, it's going to take time. So just, I guess the concern, if there is overcrowding that's happening right now, if this is a multi-year, as I envision, probably process, because you can't just throw a building up or make additions quickly. How does that affect students next year? And the current students we have in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade that are,
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Matt, did you have anything you wanted to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll say 2 things. So I'm just so folks know, I'm the Deputy Director of Building Services. And so 2 things I'll point out with respect to high schools. The school board and the Board of Supervisors have funded a project for a new high school center, which is to try to relieve capacity at all 3 of the main high schools. That is a project that is currently in the design phase and is slated to open, I believe, in the 26-27 school year. So that's one aspect that's underway currently for high school capacity. I know this is a middle school study. With respect to short-term solutions and with respect to the long-term planning, this is a study that will hopefully provide recommendations for some long-term plans, whether that's, as Lisa Walker at the very beginning said, that might mean renovations to schools, that might mean additions to schools, that might mean a new school. We don't know. We're at the very beginning of this study. But whatever those recommendations are, it would then go through our typical capital improvement plan process. And so what that would look like is those recommendations will go to the school division's long-range planning committee for their consideration to be weighed against other requests that come in from the county and other parts of the school division. And ultimately, the long-range planning committee will rank all of those requests that come in terms of priority. That recommendation, that report from that committee then goes to the school board. The school board can change the ranking as they see fit. And ultimately, a request for capital funds is then sent from the school board to the Board of Supervisors. And in Albemarle County, the Board of Supervisors is the public body that has the ability to appropriate funds for any capital expenditures that are made. When it gets to that point, school projects are competing against any other community needs that may arise. So that may be parks and recreation needs, transportation needs, fire rescue needs, all of these capital facilities that you see that are funded by the public are then weighed by the Board of Supervisors. So what I would recommend, if there is something that you are very passionate about, I would encourage you to get involved in that process with your locally elected representatives, whether that's your school board member or the Board of Supervisors member, to express your opinion as to what you feel is really critical, because they do take that into consideration when determining where to put those funds for those capital expenses. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Matt. All right. What opportunities do you see for the future of ACPS middle schools?
Sorry, can I go back and ask
Sure.
a question?
Sure.
Sorry, I guess like building on what I think Anne was saying, like as a parent of a current fifth grader, so rising middle schooler, is there any chance that like any of this will ever even impact him? I'm just thinking as we're in Crozet now, and there was talk about a Crozet expansion for years, many years before it finally got done. And many kids, including my other son, like came and left the school before that happened. So I know that, like what Matt was saying, that there's a lot of questions about funding that are not within ACPS's discretion. But just like a general sense of how long will this process take, theoretically? And then also, are they taking into account projected growth within different parts of the county? Like 5 years down the road, what's enrollment projected to look like? I mean, I believe the long range planning committee does that, but will VMDO be taking that into consideration and coming up with their plans?
Daphne, you want me to take that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so as far as capacity projections, yes, VMDO is part of their scope is to factor in capacity projections. And we've actually asked them to project even further out than our typical projections do internally. Obviously, the further out we go, there's more risk in that, more uncertainty. But that is part of their scope. It's tough to answer your first question. You know, how soon could an impact happen? Because as I was saying, there's a lot of variability in that. A renovation could happen very quickly if it's funded. I mean, we can get small renovations done, you know, the design within a year and begin our construction, maybe even small additions that can happen. A large new school, for example, yeah, you're probably talking 3 to 4 years out. So it just, the range varies. And like I say, it depends upon funding by the Board of Supervisors as well. I know we're about to get kicked out, but
We're
Thank
about to get ready to go back in the other room. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'll ask Lisa or others to just give us a sense of time as we do some report backs from what we discussed. And we'll try to, about how much do we have? We have 5 groups. And how much time? 10 minutes?
We're right at 10 minutes. Yep.
Okay, 5 groups. Okay, so why don't we start with group number 1, and Lisa, if you can just give us a little flag of about a 2-minute report back of what we discussed.
Okay, does anybody else want to be the reporter? I'm happy to hand it off. Okay, I took some notes. It seems like some of the things that, obviously the same ones that we're scrolling up on our input questions, technology and equal access to technology throughout the division was a big part of it. And I think that probably includes not just making sure that kids have devices on site, but that they have access to the internet, you know, a blanket across the county, which is probably a little more challenging. But so that was one of it. Types of spaces, flexibility of spaces, how they can be used. The arts was mentioned, and the fact that Burley has an auditorium because it was a high school before it was a middle school. And so it has the option of doing some things that the other middle schools don't have the option of doing right there on site. Staff areas was brought up to make sure that even though it's not a programming thing, we do want to take care of our staff and make sure that they have spaces and areas that fill their needs as teachers, and as technology moves forward, that they have the type of spaces that they need to collaborate and to work individually as well. And then how we're going to organize grade level cohorts, you know, as we move forward. Do we try to keep grade levels together? Do we integrate? Those types of things. So those were the concerns brought up in our group.
Okay, that's awesome. Thanks, group number 1. How about group number 2? Rob? Oh, someone speaking?
I think, was it?
Rob is trying right now.
There you go. Bob's trying to speak.
Oh, here we
There you
go.
go.
Everybody can hear me. All right. Well, Lisa, you covered a lot more ground than I did in my group. You're just an excellent facilitator. But I'm going to take this because I got to do it in 45 seconds. So my group, speak up if I miss anything significant here. But I would say we spend a good bit of our time, and I think the overarching theme of our discussion together was equitable use of our resources and equitable facilities across the county. We talked a lot about growth and redistricting and the kind of pressures that are happening in different parts of the county and how we respond to that and provide an equitable learning experience across the county, but also perceptions of haves and have-nots and how we address that in the study. Some interesting and but not necessarily surprising topics that were brought up were safety concerns, obvious, things like shootings that are dramatic events and in the news these days, but also things like traffic safety, particularly on some sites that have multiple facilities, and even things like emergency vehicle access and things like that. And then the other one that I found very interesting was considerations of the history of these buildings, not just historic buildings like Burley that have a rich history to them and have evolved over time, but how these facilities have been used to date, and what that might mean for the investment that's gone into them, but the future investment that we'd make in them.
That sounded like a lot of ground covered. Group 2. Very thoughtful. Thanks, guys. So how about group number 3?
I think that was my group. So we started out talking about the redistricting and just kind of will this master plan look at that and what that means for affecting kids. That kind of stemmed into also, the equity of our additions and renovations or what these schools are getting. It makes it a lot easier for parents to think about that redistricting. It's, an easier decision of where to go when one school has more than the other or whatnot. We also talked about kind of traffic issues and site constraints within sites that have 2 different schools or multiple schools on them, and what that kind of traffic pattern and what that looks like if you even have an expansion and you're accepting more students into there. I think that was a concern that was voiced. And then being mindful of space and design. We talked about, having a renovation, but is it necessarily good for the school, or are the teachers going to take advantage of it? Is it good for the students? That was a big thing to just bring on. Mindful design, I think, is a good word to describe it as. So
Awesome. Sounds great. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks, group 3. I think for group 4, Keith is going to volunteer to present back our discussion. You there, Keith?
Okay,
Ah.
if it worked, the button would. Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So we talked about a few items. The first item we talked about was special needs children, having them thought about in the overall plan, as a deal with space and other things for them, because they come to school too and money needs to be spent. A lot of things are happening in their area and we need to be up to date with that. The other thing that we talked about was expansion, which was like whether or not we were going to build another middle school or change the map the way the schools are now due to the crowdedness, and that the concern of the schools being so overcrowded and having more people come, so forth and so on. And what we were told was that is being looked at in the study, and the plan is to get a 10-year projection on what is happening with that flow of people to give a better idea of what is truly needed. We also discussed quickly a master plan for the schools and making it more equitable for everyone across the board with the school. And the last but not least was Burley, due to its historical nature, trying to do something a little different to set aside the historical part and let the other part of the school be the other part of the school. And that way people can, come in and see the historical, the pictures, the trophies from when they were undefeated in football, to be able to put those things out there for other people to see and enjoy. So that was us.
Excellent. Thanks, Keith, for that. And do we have a fifth group? I think we do.
Okay, so in group 5, we spent a lot of time talking, bringing up what our questions and concerns were. And the one we spent the most time talking about was just worry about the length of the implementation, understanding that, this 9 months of building the study, but then how long, which children are actually going to be affected. So if you have a child who's in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, or currently in middle school and dealing with over enrollment currently, they might not see any outcome of this. So kind of talking about what, how long does the whole process take? And then I was also brought up, they, just verifying or questioning that future projected enrollments are also going to be taken into consideration. And then lastly, mentioning that their concern was, is this a starting point to also then look at high school enrollment and the utilization of the high school facilities as well. So let me know if I forgot anything in my group.
That's great. Thanks so much, Anne, and for everyone. And did we leave any group out? Am I right that we had 5 groups? Okay. Well, I think
Alicia might have she had someone in her group. I'm not
Okay.
sure if she had anything there that she's in the
Of
interpretation room.
course. Yep.
I'm not sure how she's going to be able to share since she's in the interpretation room. Maybe she can put it in the chat. I don't know.
Let's see. Okay. Hi, Alicia. Did you have anything to share from your chat room? I think she's typing it in the chat function, which we can gather. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Appreciate everyone's input and involvement tonight. You'll see on the screen some opportunities to get involved and connect. We're going to be sending out some surveys, which will happen between the months of May and June, where you can provide some additional feedback. We'll have some back to school events, more information provided in the fall. And again, we plan to do a gallery walk to unveil the final master plan and present all of the summaries from the study. So it'll be another chance to review all of the outcomes of the study, and that will happen sometime in mid-October. And of course, the website link you can find there at the bottom of the screen that will continue to provide updates for scheduled events and opportunities to connect. So with that, is there anything else, Lisa or Daphne, before we sign off?
I think we're good. Let's see.
Yes.
I think we're good. I'm just shooting a quick answer to one of the questions that came in at the end, or maybe I can just say, was asking about redistricting and could that play into it? And I think that at this point, we are very, very early in the study. We haven't really gotten into the meat of it really yet, but I don't think anything is off the table at this point. I think it depends on what they find and what they feel the best recommendations are after they look at the growth projections and patterns and that type of thing.
And we'd like to thank everyone for the time that we've had together this evening. We're going to put the email address, superintendent's office at k12albemarle.org in the chat. So you can send additional questions or request information. Briefly to close, I would like to thank our presenters for their time. I'd like to thank Eric Irizarry and Ayana Mitchell for managing the slide deck and fielding the questions and monitoring the chat. Also like to thank Dr. Haas for joining us this evening. He was out of town on business, so we were glad that he was able to join us this evening. And also like to thank Gary Moore for technology support. As I mentioned in the beginning of the session, we have recorded this session and we'll send it out to our entire community. The session will be up on our YouTube channel, so you will have access to it. I can't encourage you enough to email the superintendent's office at k12albemarle.org, and we'll put that email in the chat for you. Thank you again for a fantastic session. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Alicia.
You guys like my ironing board in the background?
I didn't notice it until you said something.
And I was trying to hide it. I kept
Were you doing a little ironing this evening?
No, I was over the weekend and I just didn't move it.
That's what he does during the Zoom meeting when he's not on the camera. He's just back there ironing.
I wish. I was listening. That was a lot of good information.
Yeah.
It was.
It was good. I think a little rough start, but I think we got everything figured out. It's difficult with this third party sometimes too. But.
Well, and you had a good turnout. I thought that you had a good size turnout.
Yeah, we had like 80 people at one time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think some got scared off during the small group discussion. You saw everyone scatter a little bit, but it's good though. Good discussions in the groups.
Yeah, we usually do this as a webinar, so it was a little different tonight. I think the interpretation feature was very different from the webinar.
But it was good. You guys did a really nice job. I thought the presentations were very thorough. Now, so if someone's really interested, because it was fast, I mean, but now we can look at them in more depth, and because he explained everything, so now I can go back and look at it and really try to understand what it means.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
All right. See you tomorrow.
Bye.